Hello, and welcome to a very special edition of ACF Chef's Forum. We're excited to have a rising culinarian here with us today with information just for you, the leaders and future leaders of the food service industry. We're certainly in for a treat as we have an amazing presentation focusing on gluten-free baking techniques live from America's Resort as we virtually travel to the Greenbrier in the beautiful mountains of West Virginia. I'm Jackie Pressinger, American Culinary Federation's Director of Strategic Partnerships, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's educational program. Today, we'll be taking questions for our featured culinary presenter live during this webinar as we are able. Please use the chat function to collaborate with other chefs and students tuning in, and the Q&A function to ask the chef questions. Okay, so let's get that discussion going in the chat. Please let us know where you're tuning in from today. Let's meet today's featured rising chef. Originally from Columbus, Ohio, Nina Ryan works as the line cook in the main dining room at the Greenbrier. Nina is a 2020 graduate of The Ohio State University with a degree in food policy. She also specializes in gluten-free baking and offers both cooking classes and culinary experiences for those with food allergies and dietary restrictions. We're so pleased to have you with us here today. So at this time, please join me in welcoming our guest presenter, Nina Ryan. The floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for having me. And thank you so much to the American Culinary Federation for including me as well. My name is Nina. I am a culinary professional with the Greenbrier in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. I actually started in pastry, working in gluten-free pastry. And if you can believe it, I have never worked in traditional pastry for a day in my life. I actually have celiac disease, and so I can't really be in the presence of gluten. I definitely cannot consume gluten. And so that makes a culinary professional's life a little bit complicated because I can't be around the thing that we use the most. So I've had to adapt. I've had to evolve, and I have figured out how to work with gluten-free pastries and baking and breads and how to incorporate gluten-free products and other allergen-safe alternatives in restaurants. So as Jackie previously mentioned, I started in food policy and food access, and then I graduated pastry, and I got really excited and really interested in that route. And now here I'm working at the Greenbrier on the culinary side, but also I have the privilege and honor of getting to incorporate some gluten-free products onto their outlets and their menus. So today we're going to work with one of my favorite recipes, which is a basic recipe. It's something that every culinary professional needs to have in their kitchen, in their tool belt. It spans pastry, it spans culinary. You can use it for a variety of different things. We're going to work on a short crust. So a short crust pastry is, think of a pie dough, think of laminated doughs, things that have medium lamination, medium puff, but they're gluten-free. So I am giving you access to my super secret gluten-free flour blends. And if you know anything about the gluten-free market, you know that cooks and bakers are so protective of their gluten-free flour mixtures because there's always a trade secret, right? Everyone is always doing it just a little bit different, and theirs is always the right way. But I'm going to teach you how to cost effectively make your own gluten-free flour blends in your restaurants, in your homes, in your culinary schools, whatever you want. And here's the secret. Most gluten-free flour blends are actually 50-30-20 ratios. So when you measure in grams, 50% of your ratio is white rice flour. 30% of your ratio is tapioca flour or potato starch. And the other 20% of your ratio is the other option, tapioca or potato starch. So with that, there are options for substitution, but gluten-free baking gets a little bit tricky because we're missing that really, really important item, which is the gluten protein. So I'm going to walk you through this recipe, and as we go through it together, I'll show you what's lacking, where we can make up for the lack of gluten, and what's going on, what the deal is. So we're going to start with 300 grams of my gluten-free flour blend. So this gluten-free flour blend specifically is 120 grams or 150 grams, pardon me, of white rice flour. And it's 90 grams of potato starch, and then the rest is tapioca starch. So we add that 300 grams in, we add in a half a teaspoon of xanthan gum. We have a half a teaspoon of salt and 1 tablespoon of sugar. That's our dry ingredients. Some gluten-free flour blends on the open market choose to add in dry milk powder. And what dry milk powder does in gluten-free baking is it allows the mixture to give more of a crumb and more tenderness. For a pie dough, you don't really need that. You want flakiness. So we can work with these products, and then we're going to add in 8 ounces of cold butter. You know the deal with pie crusts. The butter is the star of the show. So we're lucky when we're making a pie crust because we do not need to worry about the rise coming from gluten, because the rise comes from that Maillard reaction in the oven with the butter. So I'm going to put on some gloves and I'm going to show you how we mix this dough together. Now you can easily make this dough recipe in a RoboCube or a food processor. In fact, that's my preferred method, but I'm going to show you exactly how we coat the crumbs of butter to get that reaction. So I'm tossing it in flour. I'm tossing it in the flour mixture, and you can see that I have the butter fully coated. Now, as I'm tossing it, I want to crush the butter, and I want to flatten it to make basically sheets. So you see how I'm flattening this butter? I'm making sheets. So I'm already starting the lamination process, which is so important for pastry. Like I said, we don't really need the protein of gluten as much in a pot brise or a short crust pastry because we have butter. This recipe can be used for people with other allergies, with a vegetable shortening or an animal shortening. I prefer to use a vegetable shortening, even though it has a little bit less flavor, because you can cut out another allergen. A lot of people have dietary restrictions and walk into at least 1 or 2 of the Greenbrier outlets with an allergy. We receive guests with allergies every single night, whether that is one of the top 8 allergens or whether that's an alpha gamma dal allergy, which is an allergy to red meats. So reducing the amount of hidden beef products, hidden soy products, hidden corn products, hidden nut products, and dairy products really does make a culinarian's life a lot easier, and it protects a lot of people with food allergies from accidentally getting sick. So I am continuously flattening this butter. You can also use a pastry cutter. Pastry cutter is very easy. We're racing against the clock right now a little bit because we're keeping our butter as cold as possible. But every time I touch this butter, right, my hands are warming it up. So as is typical of a short crust pastry and any pastry that's butter-based, we have to work quickly, we have to keep the dough cold, and we have to continuously take it in and out of the cooler. I'm going to show you all the steps, and I'm going to try and not heat up the butter too much. You might think that just putting it back in the cooler is going to work after you've beaten down all the butter out of their sheets. But if you have a fine crumb mixture here, as you're making your short crust pastry, you've lost all ability for the dough to flake. So you really do want to watch how much you break down the flour and how much you break down the butter. So I'm continuing to move it through my hands. I had the pleasure of working for a gluten-free bakery when I was in college, just because I love to bake. And I thought it was so much fun to wake up in the morning and to make pastries and to make breads and cookies and cakes and all those fun things. And I never thought that I would actually go into the culinary world as a culinarian. But here I am now. I am at America's Resort, which is one of the most fascinating places to learn and to grow. And one of the great things about the Greenbrier is that they really do give you a lot of opportunities to research and develop things, follow what you're interested in. A lot of people are members of the apprenticeship program, where they have a 3-year training program and they get to work in all the different outlets of the hotel and experience all the different types of cuisine that we offer, and also be trained by the chef de cuisines and the executive chef at the hotel directly. So there's so many options, both at the Greenbrier and in the culinary world, to follow what you're interested in. I happen to find myself here in the mountains of West Virginia, and I can tell you I do not regret it for a second. I'm having the best time. And I get to bake, so that's awesome. So I'm continuing to break this down. I'm going to show you a little bit of what I've got here. You can see now that I have a lot of flours still out, but I also have flecks here and there of sheets, and that's butter. In a food processor, if you're using a RoboCoupe, it's going to show the bottom doesn't move, but the top still looks like a lot of flour. That's the place where you want to go. The main difference in gluten-free baking is the flours that we're using are all starch. So science lesson alert, all-purpose flour, regular wheat flour, is the whole grain of wheat, but it's been processed one time. But gluten-free flour is primarily starch. So when gluten forms, there's the germ and there's the starch, and they separate. And gluten forms when there's 2 different proteins that come together and meet water. So other products like rice and tapioca and potatoes are highly starch-based. Those wash away with water. They absorb way more water. So when we're baking gluten-free, we have to either decrease our flour content by 10% of a regular recipe, or increase our hydration ratio. So it's all science. And I can tell you what, I did not know that I was going to be getting into so much science and so much math when I started working in the culinary world. They tell you it's an art, but it's also a science. So at this point, I'm going to start adding in some chilled water. And this is the important part. The water is to texture. So there are a couple of different things that impact how much water you add into this recipe. If you substitute a flour, if you use cornstarch instead of potato starch, or you use arrowroot starch instead of tapioca starch, those flours have different hydration ratios. So you have to practice and get comfortable with seeing what the dough should look like as it comes together, because it's going to be different than what you're used to working with in a gluten dough. I call it a gluten dough, but it's really the other dough. So I'm adding in a little bit more. Just for frame of reference, I add in anywhere between 1/2 to 3/4 of a cup of water. The other thing that changes the amount of water that you add in is the fat to water ratio of your butter. And people often forget that butter has a little bit of water in it. So American butters have lower fat contents than European butters. So often you'll see in pastry departments, they order in European butters because they can get more flake out of their puff pastry. But if you're working with grocery store butters, or you're working through a food supplier, and all you have access to is whatever that big box brand's butter is, you know that it's going to have a little bit more water in it than a European dough or European butter. So I am continuously testing by squeezing to see how hydrated my dough is. And don't get scared. It doesn't look like it comes together until it comes together. It's going to be crumbly. Remember, there's no gluten in it. So we're working with what we got. So I'm bringing it together, and as I squeeze it, if it holds together like this, for the most part, I'm good. I know that I have just enough water to make it work. So I can remove my gloves, I can change them, and take this guy onto my work surface. Thank you very much. Thank you. New gloves, because I like to be clean. Who wants flour everywhere, right? Thank you, thank you. The worst is when you're putting on gloves and you just had gloves on before, and so your hands are like shrunken a little bit and they just don't get on. These are food service problems everyone can relate to. So I'm going to turn my dough, for lack of a better term, out on the work surface. And just to give you a frame of reference, this is what it looks like. It does not look like a dough right now. If I was you and I did not know that this was going to come together, I'd be a little bit scared because it looks helpless. But I'm going to tell you right now, stay true, stick with it, trust the process. We're doing this together. We're all in it together. And also, keep in mind that it's much better to underhydrate rather than overhydrate, because we can adjust. If I need to add in a little bit more water as I'm bringing this together, that's okay. We can do that. And you can see that this dough is so much lighter than a traditional dough made with AP flour. And that's because we're working with different starches. Now, if I'm going to adjust and use something like sorghum flour or millet flour, those different colored flours are going to lend a different color to my pie crust. So you'll notice when I show you some finished pie crusts that my pie crusts look a lot lighter. It's not necessarily because they're undercooked or something's wrong with the recipe. I'm just using really, really, really light colored starches. Like think of a potato, a russet potato. It's so white once you peel it. Think of the cassava root, which tapioca is derived from. Man, it's light. And of course, white rice. It's predominantly white rice. So I'm forming it into a ball. And yes, it is still crumbly. Trust the process, like I said. And as much of a ball that I can keep together, I am going to transfer it to saran wrap. And I'm basically going to chill it. And this chill is important to keep the butter cold, but it's also important because the dough is going to hydrate. It's really, really easy to get to go cowboy and become a little bit of a renegade and overhydrate, and then let that dough chill. And all of a sudden you've got way too much water in your dough and you can't roll it out. Or worse, it becomes too tough when you bake the crust. So this goes in the cooler for about 30 minutes. It can go in the cooler overnight, up to 3 days. It can also freeze at this point. So you can have discs of frozen pie crust prepared for a moment's notice. And then let's roll it out. So this is a chilled pie crust. I let it chill for 30 minutes and then I took it out for 10 minutes. And with this chilled pie crust, letting it sit out for a couple of minutes is just going to help me manipulate the dough better, or manipulate and roll it out, and just make the whole process a lot easier. Oftentimes people don't realize that with gluten-free baking, plastic wrap is your best friend. It really is. So I'm going to shoot some, this is plain white rice flour off my surface. Remember, we're working with awkward hydration ratios and it's pretty much to texture. So I told you about a half a cup to 3/4 of a cup of water, depending on your butter and also depending on the starches that you're using. And I don't want to incorporate too much butter, which is why I don't specifically add butter to the top of my pie crust as well. I'm going to use saran wrap, again, plastic wrap, to roll it out, and that helps keep it together. That's like a gluten-free trade secret. So more gloves. Now look at this dough. It's still a little crumbly, right? But it's holding together so much more than the dough that I showed you 2 seconds ago. Remember, it's gluten-free. It doesn't have that protein. But that does not mean that it does not taste delicious. Let me tell you, it tastes delicious. So I'm going to cover the dough with plastic wrap. And I'm going to stretch out the plastic wrap to prevent creases from forming in the dough and having the dough separate. And I start rolling it out. Something that a lot of culinary professionals don't realize is that wood is porous. So if this rolling pin has been used on regular gluten doughs, it retains some of the gluten protein in the wood. And that goes for any wooden cooking utensils that touch pastas, that touch couscous, that touch bread, that touch doughs, batters, all of that. So it's important if you are integrating gluten-free baking and you're positioning it to be safe for people with food allergies, to have separate wooden utensils, to really hone in on those sanitation procedures and really protect people from being cross-contaminated. So if you are curious, I actually work on a hotline in the presence of gluten, but I do not work with flour directly. So when a person with the food allergy comes in, we have a very strict allergen safety procedure at the hotel that involves changing gloves and washing utensils and sanitizing utensils, because of course they're different, and making sure that not only in the pickup on the hotline, but also in the food preparation for the entire 3 days coming up to that night service, the food is safe for the consumption of any person with food allergies. So if I cook fish and I cook shellfish as well, I try to keep the shellfish and the regular fish separate at all times. Same with dairy products, same with soy products, same with corn products, sesame, mustard, nuts, all of those items. It's really, really helpful in making sure that a customer feels safe and welcome in your restaurant at all times, if they know that the food that they're consuming is absolutely safe for them to consume. And one of the most risky areas is the bake shop. Because of the gluten, because of the presence of dairy, the presence of egg, the presence of soy, people don't realize how much soy lecithin is in things. In aerosol containers and pre-made mixes. So I'm rolling out this dough. You can see it's rolling pretty thin, actually. It's about 1/4 inch. Looks really nice. And gluten-free baking is half understanding the science, but it's also half of learning how to handle the dough and learning how to manipulate it. So I'm going to pull over my pie plate. This is called a cake lifter. You can buy it at a lot of different pastry shops. Of course, you could also use a bench scraper that's got a really thin side and flat edge. You could also use a flat turner, like a grill flat turner. Lots of different options as long as it's pretty thin and can get under the dough. Now this sometimes trips people out, but stay with me. When you are moving the dough to the pie plate, your best bet is to keep the plastic wrap attached. Don't peel it off and then reattach it. Keep it in its rolled out state, and it's going to provide leverage for you and help keep the dough from breaking. So like I said, it's half methodology with gluten-free dough, half understanding the science. So I'm going to use a cake lifter, and it's getting pretty easily off the bottom. It's lifting off because we've got that little bit of rice flour. I'm so excited because I'm looking at my dough right now, and you can see the sheets of butter in the dough, which means it's going to be so flaky, so delicious. And my favorite moment is when I have a customer or a guest or a friend or a family member taste my products and they say, oh my gosh, if you didn't tell me, I have no idea this is gluten-free. That's like top 10 moments of all time as a culinary professional. So this moment, like, let's just take this in. Cake lifter off. I can move this right now, right? This is my time to shine. I'm going to lift it with the cake lifter into the pie plate. On that final scrape, where you're getting those last bits of pie crust off of the workstation and you're dropping it in the pie plate, you cannot lift it and keep pressing, because the more you're moving under it and the more you're shimmying it around, the more chance it has of breakage. So I dropped it in, right? Now we're going to gently take our hands underneath the dough. And at the same time that we're lifting it up, push it in to the pie plate. I still have the plastic wrap on, yes, and that's on purpose. And I'm going to turn the pie plate. Look at that. It's a beautiful color. I wish that you could taste a little bit of the dough with me because it's just freaking awesome. You can see the butter. And once I feel good about how it fits, how it creases, how it lays over the edges of the pie plate, I can peel off the plastic wrap. Here we are. And either using a pastry wheel or a baby offset spatula, one of my top 5 kitchen must-haves, I can just start trimming the edges. The more you work with gluten-free dough, the tougher it gets, right? Because first of all, you're warming it up, so the butter's starting to melt. And second of all, that's just like an overall rule. You don't want to work with short crust dough very, very often, like too much. So this leftover dough can either be used for top crust or for decor. For the bits that are being overworked a little bit too much, those are great options. Those are great little scraps for decor, for little leaves, little flowers, you know, whatever you want to make your pie, however you want to beautify it, lattice. And you can absolutely lattice with this dough. It's freaking awesome. I have a beautiful pie crust in this plate. This is awesome. So we're going to put this in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes, let it firm up again. Keep in mind, we want to keep that butter really, really cold, and we want to continue to let the dough hydrate. So as is, it can just go in the refrigerator, 30 minutes. And we're going to station wipe down, and we're going to dock some dough, and we're going to cook it off. Let's do a station wipe down. When you're sourcing gluten-free products, the number one question that a lot of restaurants have is, how can I afford to keep gluten-free products in my kitchen, knowing just how expensive they are? Well, the secret to finding some of these gluten-free products is looking in your Asian food store sections. So you can get really, really great rice flours and potato starches and tapioca and all of these options. Once you start looking in the Asian sections and in the Indian section, Southeast Asian. And as for tapioca, if you're looking in the Latin areas of grocery stores, Latin areas of the food sections. So I'm going to show you exactly what I used. And you'll see, we sourced it through a large scale supplier, but they have a lot of access to products like Thai rice flour. It's used very, very often in different Asian restaurants across the continent and in the United States, of course, with Asian cuisines. And we have potato starch. And then tapioca starch is sometimes a specialty product. Just depends on who your distributor is. But you can find this rice flour in 1 pound bags and in 50-pound bags. And that rice flour makes a great option for deep frying, for panko, for crepes, for cakes, for all sorts of things. There are plenty of recipes out there where you don't even need a specific gluten-free flour blend. You can just use white rice flour and it's going to be delicious. So products that are basically primarily egg-based, they get their structure and their development from egg whites, whipped egg whites, meringue, essentially. Are really great options for using white rice flour. And products that have the addition of eggs and milk, like crepes, and don't require a ton of structure, those also make great white rice flour options as well. So I have a prepared pie crust for you that I'm going to show you how to dock and put in the oven. And let's go. Chilled pie crust, 30 minutes, traditional dock. Docking is a fancy word for poking a fork in it. And what this does is it allows airflow so that the pie crust does not puff. It keeps it from going crazy on the rise, and overall, big fan. So we're going to dock this, put it in the oven. And this is what a finished gluten-free pie crust looks like. You can see that it's not super dark. It doesn't have a super dark reaction, like browning reaction. You can egg wash it if you want and get a bit of a darker crust, but it doesn't mean that it's undercooked. It's just different flours. So once you get a little bit acclimated to that, you can see that it tastes delicious. It flakes. It cuts beautifully. It stays together. All around 10 out of 10 experience. So let me show you some applications for this pot breeze. In one application, we've got a beautiful quiche, very French, very delicious. We also can use this pie crust for a play on a beef Wellington. So you can see it's super, super light, but it's still delicious. Absolutely. Gluten-free, delish. That's a savory application. And then, of course, another pastry application. We have lemon meringue tarts. There are so many uses for gluten-free pie dough in your kitchen. And I am so excited for you to experiment, try, figure out what works, what doesn't work, and how you can make gluten-free pie crust on your own. So if any of you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
My goodness, Nina, everything looks spectacular. I mean, looks amazing. I wish I was there to sample some of those great products that you produced today. And obviously, thank you very much for sharing all those educational tips with us. We do have some questions coming in. Some of them are in regards to gluten-free baking, and some of them are in regards to you and your journey. So I'll start off with a gluten-free one. A student has written in and was wondering if you could list some other common ingredients in the bake shop or kitchen that contain gluten that they should be aware of, that they might not realize have gluten and could be a potential allergen.
So one of the most prominent things that people don't always realize is soy sauce has wheat in it. The soybeans are fermented in wheat. So any product that is a soy or soy derivative, soy sauce derivative, like anything like a chili oil or chili crunch, sesame paste that's got some soy vibe going on, that has gluten in it. Other things that people don't often think about is that beef base and a lot of chicken base and products that are pre-made but shorten the culinary process for culinarians. So like cream of mushroom, cream of chicken bases, things like that. Those also contain gluten, and you have to be very, very careful. Other things are gumbos. Anytime you use a roux, sometimes in different kitchens, people take shortcuts on sauces, where a hollandaise should absolutely not have flour in it. It doesn't require flour to make a hollandaise. Sometimes kitchens will add flour to thicken it up on the fly. And those are scary, scary places where gluten hides and people don't realize it. And they're just not thinking, oh my gosh, this has flour in it.
Great. Well, thank you. Very, very thorough. Another student is also wondering what steps that you recommend in taking to avoid cross-contamination of potential allergens. I know you mentioned the rolling pin and so forth. Are there different ways that you label products, or how do you handle this when a guest identifies themselves as having a food allergy?
So one of the great things that the main dining room at the Greenbrier does is we have a card. And on this card, the culinary team has it, and also the front of house has it, and it lists all of the allergens that are present in products. So if I am cooking a dish with pasta, it'll show the pasta, the soy, the dairy, all of the items in it. If I'm cooking a dish with just vegetables, it'll show that there's oil in the oil. It doesn't contain any additives in it and all of that. So our front of house and our back of house are totally aligned on what is safe and what is not safe. And as for actual pickups on the line, whenever there is a major allergen that it does not span multiple products, like we work in a French kitchen, so there's butter in pretty much everything. If I have someone come in with a dairy allergy, I am going to make them everything from scratch in a separate area, right? But we don't use a lot of gluten on our line. So for the items that do involve gluten, always wear a glove and immediately strip off that glove as soon as you finish working with that product.
Great advice. Thank you very much. And we do have some folks who are tuning in that are wondering about your career journey, how you came from food policy to the Greenbrier, such an iconic resort. And they're wondering what inspired you to want to work at the property, and what led you there, what the process was to have you where you are today in the main dining room.
I took a jump. I did not know that I was going to find myself working on the front end, actually doing the baking. I always knew that I loved food, but I didn't know how I wanted to work with food. I see myself as an entrepreneur and someone who is really excited about developing businesses around food. And I knew that I needed some more intense culinary training. So what better place in the US, especially the Midwestern region, the South, the Eastern side of the United States, than to come to the Greenbrier. The Greenbrier is historic. The French kitchens, the French basis of cuisine, I knew that I would get a really, really classical training. I would work immediately with some of the most well-esteemed culinary professionals in the industry. And I knew that I would be able to support the team in developing more allergen safety options. And that's a big passion of mine. And also, I just knew that coming here, I could learn so much from other people my age, from other people that have been in the industry for a lot longer. One of the great things about the Greenbrier is we have a J1 program. And so a lot of our culinarians come from anywhere around the world, from different culinary schools. And so I have had this amazing opportunity to learn a lot of different kinds of cuisines just from other line cooks that I've worked with, in addition to this amazing classical basis.
Outstanding. Well, to kind of build onto that question too, another question that came in was, what is your advice to those who might be tuning in today, perhaps sitting in a culinary classroom or in a high school culinary classroom for their journey in becoming a chef? What advice or tips might you offer to them?
I would absolutely say be disciplined, engage in self-discipline. You have to work every day at your craft. It takes 10,000 hours. The chef that I work for, who's wonderful, Chef Solorio, says it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. And so if you're working 16-hour days every day, it's going to take at least 5 years for you to become an expert at your craft. So that means putting in the work, putting in the long hours, baking, cooking for as many people as you can in your free time, finding ways to offset those costs by either going to a property that's going to support that for you or finding a way to sell your products. Also leaning into the people who know so much more about an area that you want to lean in on. A lot of culinary professionals here come to work with chocolate. We have an amazing chocolatier pastry chef here. And so it's all about finding who does it best and going and seeking that for yourself and being disciplined in the process.
I love it. Fabulous. Well, we're going to jump back real quick to a culinary question. Someone has written in wondering, what temperature did you cook the pie crust and for how long?
So I cooked the pie crust at 300 degrees Fahrenheit in a professional convection oven, which is 350 degrees Fahrenheit in a home oven. And to par bake the pie crust, it's 7 minutes. And to fully bake the pie crust, it's 14 minutes. And I do always par bake my pie crust before I put a filling in, just to be sure that the bottom doesn't get soggy, we don't have any grossness going on there, and to be sure that the bottom holds firm and that I could literally take this completed pie out of its shell and it would look beautiful on a plate.
Excellent. And this is kind of a fun one, so I'll ask this one as well. Do you have a favorite food memory? And or if not, do you have a favorite dish that is produced at any of the outlets at the Greenbrier?
Ooh, let me think for a second.
Sure. I know it's a tough one.
So I come from an Italian-American family. And one of my favorite food memories is my Italian grandmother actually buying pre-made pie dough, or not pie dough, I'm sorry, pre-made pizza dough. And she would deep fry it and she would pop it out of the fryer and put sprinkled granulated sugar over it. And she basically made donuts, right? But there were no like fancy doughs or anything. She just went to Walmart. She got pizza dough and she fried it. And those little donuts were my favorite things in childhood. They inspired me to bake, and I still love them today.
Oh, how cool. Well, this has just been a pleasure and a great learning opportunity, very inspirational and for those tuning in as well. And it's been so great to get a peek inside the Greenbrier and also to learn from you and your expertise on gluten-free baking. Do you have any final words, final tips, or anything that you'd like to leave those tuning in with today?
I would love to thank the American Culinary Federation again for opening the camera into the Greenbrier. Also, of course, the Greenbrier that has allowed for so much R&D, not only in gluten-free pastry, but also in gluten-free bread baking and a lot of different opportunities across the resort and hotel. So a special thank you to the Greenbrier as well.
Well, thank you so much, Nina. We certainly appreciate it. Huge virtual round of applause. We appreciate your enthusiasm. I know I could certainly feel your passion for the culinary craft and for all that you do. And I know that the students and professionals tuning in could as well. Very special thank you to Chef Brian Skelding for allowing us to arrange for this presentation and this educational topic. And for those of you who have not yet visited the Greenbrier, please do plan a trip or look into their amazing Greenbrier apprenticeship program as well. From those of you tuning in, we really want to hear from you. Please be on the lookout for a survey that you'll receive tomorrow along with the recording, and you'll need to complete the survey in order to earn your ACF CEH. Our next webinar will be held on April 6th, and we hope that you'll tune in to learn the secrets of Southern biscuits with James Beard award-winning cookbook author, Chef Virginia Willis. And also, don't forget, mark your calendars, April 20th, we'll learn about the cuisines of Guam, featuring another young culinarian who will demo live from the Greenbrier Resort. This presentation will be led by Hunter Gentry, a junior apprentice at the property. You're all also invited to join us in the Big Easy as ACF National Convention heads to New Orleans, July 16th to the 19th. Save the date for our brand new Mastercraft one-day educational events. We will also be hosting our first Culinary Educators Summit in New Orleans on July 16th. And we also have a Culinary Medicine Summit scheduled at the University of Montana on August 19th. More summits to be announced soon. Visit acfchefs.org and click on the events tab to learn more and to register now for the summits or ACF National Convention, and visit wearechefs.com to register for the upcoming webinars. So on behalf of the American Culinary Federation National Office, thank you again to the Greenbrier, thank you to Nina, and thank you for tuning in today for this delicious learning opportunity. We'll see you all soon.